Welcome. I think I've sorted out the technical things from my end, and it is really great to see everyone. I am particularly grateful to the speakers, to Dr. Ricketts, and of course, to all those who have joined us from Canada, Jamaica, Britain. Those are the countries I've seen so far. Welcome to this, our conversation, Black Perspectives in Ethics. I'd like to acknowledge firstly that I'm in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship among nations. Let us pray. Gracious God, you are known to us and to our ancestors by many names. We thank you for the wisdom that has come through faith and spiritual traditions, and for those who in written sacred texts, by their lives, by their words, by their deeds, passed on these values and guidelines for ethical behavior to us. Guide, guard, bless, and keep us. And may all that we do and say today give honor to God, known by many names, and help to advance the human race. Amen. And now I'd like to hand over to our president, Dr. Peter Ricketts, to bring greetings from the university.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marjorie, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you all, depending on the time zone that you are in. But wherever you are and wherever you're joining us from today, welcome to Acadia University, and welcome to this very important discussion this afternoon. And for those of you who are not familiar with Acadia, there's a picture of the University Hall behind me on a rather snowy day, and it always reminds me of the traditions of our university and the founders of our university who tried to create a university that was open and inclusive. And at the time of its foundation in the earlier part of the 19th century, the founding values of Acadia were very much to be open to all people of all backgrounds, of all faiths, and to offer access to post-secondary education to people regardless of their background, which at the time was an unusual value to have a university founded, particularly a university that was founded by a religious denomination. And so we try to practice those values, and we do so very poorly, quite frankly. Part of what we're trying to do, I think, with this conversation today and in other ways, is to try and be more true to the values on which our university was founded, and the values which are becoming so important in today's world. And so I welcome you all for this important discussion. And of course, it occurs in the time that we celebrate and recognize Black History Month, and in Nova Scotia and in Canada, and I think it is part of our feeling that this is not something that one should just celebrate and recognize one month in the year, but it should be something that we practice throughout the year. And this is very similar to our efforts and initiatives to reach out and engage and be more inclusive to our Indigenous peoples in Canada, and also others from different backgrounds who have traditionally had significant barriers to economic success and also, and particularly, to post-secondary education. In speaking today about ethics, we really do speak to a fundamental piece around what it means to be an inclusive society and to be an anti-racist society, because ethics affects everything that we do. It's not just the big decisions that we make, but actually they guide the small decisions that we make constantly on a daily basis. And if we don't have it right, then we're going to be creating problems, and we're going to be contributors to the barriers that exist, and part of what is referred to as systemic racism. And so, thinking about ethics, it's often said that ethics is about knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. And I think we really need to explore that as a university community. When Marjorie first started as the chaplain, as the Acadia University chaplain last year, almost coming up for a year ago, we had some wonderful discussions about how the chapel could engage the campus community and be involved in promoting discourse around the interaction of intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. And that the chapel had a role in the university that could go way beyond the boundaries, the beautiful boundaries of the building that is the Manning Chapel. And of course, with the pandemic, the chapel, like all of us, have been forced to abandon the walls and the safety and comfort of our buildings, and in fact reach out in different ways. And so this virtual meeting today is a wonderful example of how Marjorie is leading the chapel to take part and really stimulate engagement and involvement in some important self-reflection and on how we behave and how we act as a community. And also she's helping to lead our anti-racism initiative by co-chairing the President's Anti-Racism Task Force. And so I really welcome this discussion today, and particularly the approach of ensuring that really moving forward is about being open to and recognizing the value and importance of different perspectives from different cultural, ethnic, and spiritual backgrounds. And I just, some of you may have been on a call, on a meeting earlier today, where we had a wonderful presentation on teaching and learning and about the spirit of Ubuntu and this, this notion of, of being, it's I am important, but I'm only important insofar as we are all important. And it struck me how that resonated with the beautiful concept of Imsit Nokama, which in the Mi'kmaq tradition is, all our relations, that we're all part of an interrelated and interconnected society. And yes, we exist as individuals, but we only exist in it as individuals within the context of a community. And that even linked to, notions from my own background of, all for one and one for all. And I think as we explore different ethical perspectives, we can become more engaged and more able to become better people and move forward in becoming a more inclusive and welcoming community, and also working on being very proactively an anti-racist community. So thank you all for participating today. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to all of you listening and engaging in this discussion. And thank you also to Marjorie and John for your leadership from the Manning Memorial Chapel in bringing us together today and embarking on this very important discussion. And just so you can see, Bernie Sanders is watching us as well, and I think he might be happy about the nature of our discussion today. Thank you all very much. I'm looking forward to the presentations and the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Ricketts. I share with you two sayings from two traditions that I'm related to. One is from the religious tradition. It's called the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's interesting that it's found not just within Christian sacred texts, but in many other sacred texts besides. Another is from the African diasporic tradition in the Americas and the Caribbean. There's one African American version that says, hitting a straight lick with a crooked stick. And the Jamaican version says, you have to stand pan crooked and cut straight, meaning, roughly translated, you have to stand or stay on crooked and cut straight. So both versions of the same sentiment are saying, life is not always fair. Things are not perfect. But in the midst of this imperfection, of this injustice, we have to act ethically. And so with that, I do brief introductions of our speakers. I won't be able to do them justice. I'll ask you to go to our webpage afterwards to see a fuller biography of these speakers. All are respected academics and scholars. All have published in peer-reviewed journals, and some have published books as well. So we have Dr. Claudine Bonner, a scholar of African diaspora history and education, and a member of the Sociology Department and Women's and Gender Studies program at Acadia University. We have Mr. Sidney Idemudia, who is originally from Nigeria, proud alum of Acadia, and who is the executive director of Imhotep's Legacy Academy at Dalhousie University, and we'll hear some more about it. Sidney will co-present with Dr. Martin Tango. We have Marc Ramsay, who is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Acadia University, who is working on issues around law, legal moralism, parental rights, and tort theory. We have Professor Anthony Reddie from Oxford University. He is the director of the Oxford Center for Religion and Culture in Regent's Park College at Oxford, and also the editor of Black Theology, an international journal. We have Dr. Anna Framatina Wilks, who received her PhD in theology from the University of Toronto, but is right here at Acadia, full-time senior lecturer in the Department of Philosophy. She also coordinates the Women and the Philosophy group. Okay, this is one of these days when my things are not doing what I want them to do. You know about that. We have Dr. Martin Tango, who is who's an engineer and who is very involved in areas of STEM. He's also a member of the President's Anti-Racism Task Force. And just give me a minute here. I will not say which law it is that things don't go quite right, because from one perspective, that designation is not proper, if you know what I'm talking about. But I would say it. Our other scholars are Donne Seamone, who is in the area of comparative religion and who is co-chair of Acadia University's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. I think I have got everybody, and my apologies for just having things a little askew, but that's how it is sometimes. So we're going to go right into it. We are going to go in this order. We will have, firstly, presentations in sociology, Dr. Claudine Bonner, with discussant Marc Ramsay. We then move on to science and technology. We will have Dr. Tango and Sidney Idemudia. And the discussant will be Anna Framatina Wilks. And then we'll move on to theology with Professor Anthony Reddie and Donne Seamone as the discussant. What we are proposing is that we will just run the presentations. There is a chat option. We're going to ask you to please put your questions in the chat. And hopefully at the end, we will be able to have a conversation and some responses to those questions and comments that we have in the chat. Once again, thanks to all the presenters and thanks to all the those who have come to join in this conversation. So over to you, Claudine.
Thank you very much for that, Marjorie. I'd like to begin by thanking you for organizing this panel today, and also to thank Dr. Ricketts for those very thoughtful words. The reminder of both Ubuntu and Imsit Nogoma was really, I think, important for us to have today. And since Dr. Ricketts pointed out his background, I think I'll share with you my background today. For those of you who don't recognize the photograph, is Ruby Bridges' first day in integrating her school. All the way back before I was born, but we're still fighting the same struggles today in certain ways. And I thought this image was perfect for the conversation I'd like to have today, because on a panel that's dedicated to discussions of race and ethics in the academy, I was perhaps expected to talk about how race is and has been understood within my particular disciplinary boundaries. But what I'd like to talk about instead is the place or the role of the social sciences, and in particular sociology in Black life. Since 2019, we've become all too aware of incidents at various universities across the country. I myself was present with our former student, Shelby McPhee, when he was racially profiled and made to feel uncomfortable on the campus at UBC. And the incidents that students have had to experience, these incidents that these students have had to experience, have led to more and more discussion of the role of the disciplines in dismantling institutional barriers, including a series of papers that were published in the Canadian Review of Sociology in August 2020. Some of those papers I will actually refer to in this talk. So I'd like to begin by saying that I understand sociology as a prevalently white and masculine form of knowledge. This form of knowledge emerged as a response to the transition to the industrial age and to a bourgeois society in Europe. But as undergrads in our first few months in Intro to Soc, we traditionally meet the founding fathers, Marx, Durkheim, Weber, and the question always arises, who else's perspective makes it into this canon? And of course, the answer to this question tends to be informed by political and ideological perspectives that reflect power dynamics at given moments in history. Many social scientists at the end of the 19th century maintained racist attitudes and worked racist myths and stereotypes into their explanations of the social world. Under the guise of value-free and universal knowledge production, racism was legitimated by dominant scientific discourses, things like social Darwinism, a perspective that sought to apply the concept of natural selection to the social world in order to account for why some groups, be they racial or class groupings, did better than others. And we can see examples of the ways this kind of thinking pervaded the academy, including sociology. When we look at things like early editions of journals, such as the American Journal of Sociology, that published articles advocating sterilization of so-called degenerates, offering glowing endorsements of the effects of slavery on the well-being of Black people, and endorsing the social theory of genetics. During this period, few scholars studied race or racism. There was no room in the discipline to examine the experiences of racialized people. But a saying that I like, necessity is the mother of invention. What we can call Black sociology is a disciplinary practice that came out of challenges and critique of the logic of social inquiry inside the academy, dating back to the early years of the 20th century and well before. And scholars like W.B. Du Bois created their own sociological epistemology premised on the exploration and theorization of the lived experiences of people of African descent. The existence and personal lived experiences of systemic racism actually led Black sociologists to do this work for the Black community. And according to Brooks and Wright, in facing institutional forces that were hostile or apathetic, Black scholars created their own means for studying themselves. Black sociology addressed cultural codes that represented Black people in very stereotypical and often distasteful ways, referring to Blacks as lazy or immoral or unclean or uneducated, rude and thoughtless. And what Black sociologists worked to do was to counteract these limited observations and wild gossip with empirical data. There were Black scholars such as Anna Julia Cooper, who had developed a framework to analyze the connections between racialized sexism and sexualized racism through her own intersectional experiences as a Black woman coming of age in the South during Reconstruction and Jim Crow. Also, Du Bois, who I've mentioned, and Franklin Frazier were creating innovative theories and methods relevant to their social world, but their scholarship remained excluded from the intellectual ranks of their white colleagues. Now, of course, today the work of many of these and other Black sociologists have been integrated into the discipline, but there continue to be critiques directed at what Patricia Hill Collins has referred to as an outsider within status. According to American sociologist Orly Clerg, the state of the scholarship on Black communities continues to be hindered by the white normativity of the discipline and subjectivities of its dominant scholars. Black Canadian sociologists and other social scientists, I think, support this perspective, with University of Toronto Ronaldo Walcott even going so far as to call the discipline foundationally anti-Black in its logics and practices. For Walcott, there's no room for the Black scholar in this community. And interestingly, in my fourth year seminar, my students raised the same point, noting the ways that the discipline highlights a progressive scholarship of wokeness of social identities, but yet the queer, the Black, the Indigenous bodies lie outside or apart and positioned in the language of abstraction. Walcott refers to Black bodies here inside the academy as matter out of place, a reminder that 120 years after Du Bois, the academy is still trying to push us out. So I think a hard lesson to learn as a young scholar is that the university itself is one of the systemic, institutionalized, cultural, and individual sites of racism. It's a hard lesson at any time. But today, there are more scholars in the academy continuing in the tradition of creating innovative theories and methods relevant to the lived experiences of Black people. And since the killing of George Floyd and the global protests against anti-Black racism, we've seen a flurry of hires across the continent as institutions acknowledge their complicity in maintaining the systemic programs, policies, and practices that challenge equity. In the wake of the global pandemic, we saw scholars taking public health to task for its unwillingness to acknowledge race as a social determinant of health, even in the face of empirical data to the contrary. The pushback was all too familiar, couched in the language of an absence of objectivity on the part of the Black scholar in their claims of racism. So it's been heartening, I guess, to see small changes in policy and practice in a very short time. York University's Carl James suggests that an ethical sociology is one that goes beyond an awareness of systemic anti-Black racism and to being truly transformative, and hence anti-racist in its practice. He challenges the discipline by asking, what good are sociological studies or the expressed support of researchers if they are merely academic exercises that do nothing to change the material conditions of racialized people and Black people in particular? I agree, and I look to the future in hopes that the discipline can learn to be transformative instead of being complicit in the destruction of Black life. For Walcott, there is no redemption. Sociology must die if Black people and Black thought are to live and flourish on their own terms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we move right on to Marc and his discussion of this.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, Marc, hearing you very well. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Well, I mean, yeah, thanks, Dr. Lewis, for the invitation, and Dr. Bonner for the presentation. A few general thoughts, and then I think a couple of more specific, questions. So, Dr. Bonner's discussion of the origins of sociology, prompted me to reflect on the writing of L.T. Hobhouse, who I sometimes work on, and sort of founding figure in British sociology and an ethicist too, and the most prominent progressive liberal of his time, though in North America he's essentially forgotten. It's interesting for me because Hobhouse was a fierce critic of social Darwinism, imperialism, wary of eugenics, but while he didn't romanticize slavery, great progressive liberal that he was, when you turn to his musings on race, particularly his 1911 statement on liberalism, things go off the rails a bit, and his musings are frankly depressing. So, he asks about the prospects for self-governance, or the capacity of self-governance for the American Negro, and he's doubtful. And, he worries about the economic manipulation of Black people. But what's missing there, is concern, for their own perspectives or their own, lived experience as significant, right, to the question of their situation. There's actually trolling around looking for connections between Du Bois and Hobhouse. I actually found a review on Amazon that was telling, where someone says, this guy's views on race are dated even for his time. Why didn't he read some Du Bois? And Hobhouse may have gotten around to that at some point, and in fact, Du Bois seems to have thought rather well of him. But and I should say, for a rich picture of Du Bois, one should turn down the road to our colleague in philosophy, Chike Jeffers. But my point here is this, right? That you can find these in that time some great progressive liberal thinkers who actually did manage to get sort of critical traction, with respect to social Darwinism and eugenics. But when those same authors turn to the issue of race, right, they're sort of, looking at the plight or the situation of Black people as a sort of social experiment to be observed and assessed from the outside by sort of knowing white people. And the lived experience of Black people, right, the authority of their voices, isn't considered relevant. So I mention that because I think it reinforces in many ways the point that Dr. Bonner makes about the foundations of sociology, the sense that the best thinkers, even if they get by certain problems, they just fail, frankly, in terms of the issue, of race. And then turning, I guess, to, contemporary, philosophy departments or liberalism as practiced or propounded within academic philosophy, you turn to, say, the work of John Rawls. And there you won't find those irksome sort of musings about race as might be found in Hobhouse or earlier thinkers. There the problem is that race simply doesn't appear as a significant consideration, or it seems to be, have been abstracted out, of the discussion. And so I think that the most prominent or significant criticisms of that kind of abstracted liberalism comes from the work of Charles W. Mills, who some of you may be, familiar with. His first significant work there being The Racial Contract. And, the argument is that lived experience, sociology, the history of racism has been sort of bled out of liberalism in its presentation and considerations. And, the way in which liberal democracy has in fact been complicit in some sense benefited, right, from the history of racism is just wholly left out of the picture of the presentation and sort of defense of liberalism. So, I mean, I can hardly do Mills's work justice, within this brief time, but worth noting that he's still someone who is interested in recovering what he takes to be the progressive potential sort of liberalism. Though I think one of the concerns is, and this dovetails into, I guess, Dr. Bonner's concerns about, sociology, that there's a sense in which, this is a prominent author, and yet liberal scholarship focusing on its central white figures seems to trundle along, not needing to reckon with, this line of criticism. So I think the point here that ethics is great, one might say, and I'm a proponent of my own discipline, but as I think the late Iris Marion Young pointed out, there's a sense in which any ethical discourse, especially when you're talking about social reform or laws, presupposes, right, some background understanding of sociology, psychology, and other considerations. And pure ethical discourse is often blind to what it presumes in terms of sociology. Around it there, I had two specific questions that, time permitting, I had regarding Dr. Bonner's presentation. First, now, what does the persisting problem identified, say, by Walcott and others say about the integration of earlier thinkers such as Du Bois and Fraser? In what way have they really been integrated? Because it left me thinking that the sense in which they've been integrated into the discipline is more like a grudging sort of, well, we'll spend a week on Du Bois and then we'll move back to the real stuff. So I was wondering if that's the sense in which, things have been integrated. And then I was also really curious about the fourth year seminar example too. And I found myself wanting to hear more about, what the students found missing from this sort of abstracted, progressive sort of wokeness. And I apologize, that's rather awkwardly phrased, but I'll round out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I hope you all don't mind if I call you by your first name.
I don't mind at all. Thanks very much. I hope I didn't go past 5 minutes. I forgot to say.
Everybody is being really, really great with this. So I'll now go on to Sidney and Martin for their double act, and they'll be followed right after by Anna, who will respond to their presentation.
So thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to share our reflections, and particularly on STEM. So Sidney and I will co-present. I know John will move slides as we finish one slide to the other. So our talk is about empowering African Nova Scotia youth, the outreach model on development and delivery of STEM initiatives, or science, technology, engineering, and math. So I work at School of Engineering, and Sidney is working at Dalhousie as Executive Director of Imhotep Legacy. But Sidney was our former student here at Acadia in around 2009. So Sidney is leading this center at Dalhousie, which empowers kids in junior high, grade 6 and 7, and we'll talk about the details later on. And next slide, please. So the motivation and inspiration about what we are sharing after when we are invited, I just want to share you a few things. The photo on the left is two girls, I believe, coming from school, and there's a lady carrying her firewood. And the message here is, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. So essentially it's about working together, because there is a value is most powerful. And this is my favorite, this little girl at the bottom. She could have walked by herself, but she has little lambs, little really pretty ones. She's carrying one, the other one is following. I believe if she can go in the neighborhood, within a house, this one will be following her while she carries this, and probably she won't get tired the whole day. But then I'll tie this to a number of African proverbs, which talks about this being together. It makes it more valuable, and it gives us power. So the first one is from Nigeria. I put this in front because Sidney is from Nigeria, and I come from Tanzania. Mine is the one from my country is at the bottom here. So it says, little by little the bird built its nest. And another one is from Egypt. It says, birds of all kinds will end up together. And this is an Ugandan one. It's a communal looks in all sides before moving, just being proactive. You don't want to be trapped into a danger. And this one is from Ghana. It's a numbers can achieve anything. So everything is about togetherness, inclusiveness, because there is power in that. Next slide, please. I joined Acadia in December 2004 as a CLT for 6 months, then a year. But at that time, I thought I have a space to participate. This is a postcard, which I have a copy with me here. When Chancellor Arthur Irving was a chancellor, he used to support a lot of things, and he used to fund a program called Discovery Quest. This is essentially a 1 week empowering or engaging grade 11 students brought from schools in Maritime, including even New England. And this is a cross-section of students who came. These are top-notch students recruited by guidance counselors. And we spent them a week with them. And for me, well, I was given a postcard for my participation. Darby and Kim Webb were so great. But my message here is, if you look at this photo closely, it's not very clear. There is no single Black kid. Then my message is, likely there is an inequity in its promotion. And this program is essentially saying, okay, these are the brightest, probably they will come to Acadia or any other higher learning institution. We want to engage them in 1 week, from Monday to Friday. There's even night activities. But we have people engaged, Dr. Arnold, Dr. David Duke, and a couple of others I know from physics, from chemistry, and Edith Callahan from business, and just giving these kids perspectives of things we do here, whether it's research or teaching. And that way they get inspired and hopefully come to Acadia or any other institution. And some of them have high scholarship. So my message here is there is something missing. There should be at least other person of color or people of color or students of color. Next, please. So then this leads to, this is another postcard. I have a copy with me. After those days, there was an initiative. If students get scholarship, then we send faculty members to graduation in high school. And I went to one in Parkview in Bridgewater, and it was so nice to give an opportunity to give a scholarship to one of the students who was coming to Acadia. But if you look at this photo here carefully, essentially, there is no Black kid. There is no student. And it's so colorful photograph, I mean a postcard, but it's giving me, Dr. Tango, thank you for being part of high school graduation. That's great. But this photo here doesn't, I think it's probably is not intentional, but these small things matters. If the same postcard was given to other kids, fine, hopefully it's not given to a person of color, then they say, well, why they should be. So the choice of little things like this to me matters. So, and that's why I said probably lacks equity. It could be an intentional, but for me, I thought there may be something around it. So these things could be changed. Next slide, please. This one, I think is also has some, the background. This is a refinery in St. John, which is owned by the Irving family. I used to teach a course called Industrial Chemistry in 2007. This was a class of 9 students. The person in the far right and far left are people who work in this refinery for over 30 years. They give us a tour, very enlightening, and say, every day I have passion to come to work because I like my job. So this is a really good message to my students. Someone saw this photo, they thought I was a student then, but anyway, here I am. There was only one girl, but the rest, this one student is carrying a hat because this fellow was late in the morning. We had to leave very early in the morning. I live in Halifax, so students took a bus from here. They joined me in Sackville. Then we went all the way to St. John. This is my colleague who didn't show up. But anyway, we also consider, but what is, to me, this is a great small class. Well, I had really good passion to work with them, but I cannot say anything, but I'm saying, even learning and exposing students to this, there should be at least one black, which of course in this case is not, I'm not saying there should be a black kid, but I'm saying I have worked with really great students and being mentor, or in this case, the industrial experience shared by these people working 30 years, but there's something missing. So anyway, good thing is we were treated at Big Stop by a really good lunch. Students really enjoyed that. And it was paid by Mr. Irving, really great. And this one on the right is just as late as 2018. These are students who worked on a project which is related to what I do on aquaponics. But when they presented, they said, we want to take a photo with you and with their helmets. And so I'm so pleased with them. I'm saying we have great students, great inspirational. I thought there should be also some who can be empowered. And apparently there are a few missing. This is a big class, but these 4, I had really good experience with them. So this gives me a lot of, I have a feeling that I'm empowering students and in some way, but I say there is some miniature microfishes or things lacking. I'm not sure if that's the case. Next slide, please. This kind of nice transition for Sidney to be invited to this talk. This was in around 2009 or 8. Here is Sidney. I put a star because he is my star student. And he was with others. They were growing something in the greenhouse. In KCIC, it was their project. And this is another one. I think Dr. Arnold is somewhere there. Sidney is there. This is his colleague. He ended up graduating at Dal, working with a good job at IMP by airport. And I'm told, Sidney tells me, I think it's correct, he's now a pastor somewhere in PEI. That's another way to empower people. But he's an engineer. This is the pathway you never knew about it. But they are great students then. And Sidney is here on a big project for me. I was the kind of a client, very complex. It's kind of like fermentation process. But Sidney is there doing his best. And that's how I think Sidney is a star. That's why I put a star. So at this point, I just want to transition to Sidney to pick up from there, and then I will come up again.
Good afternoon, everyone.
That will be Sidney, yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, Dr. Tango. It has been my pleasure being part of Acadia from 2009 to 2011 and being taught by Dr. Martin Tango. But you know, when he asked me to do a joint presentation with him about our organization, I felt yes, it was a great opportunity for me to share what we do at the Imhotep's Legacy Academy. And Dr. Tango is actually one of a volunteer assistant professor who volunteers his time and his expertise to help mentor our university mentors that go on to mentor secondary school students. But anyways, let's go to the next slide, please. Our mission at Imhotep's Legacy Academy is to facilitate African Canadian learners, their success in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's STEM studies. So you probably hear me say a lot of STEM today, or maybe ILA. ILA means Imhotep's Legacy Academy. Next one, please. This is a map that shows a lot of African Nova Scotian communities in Nova Scotia. And it shows the ones in green identifies where our program currently runs. We run in about 5 different parts of Nova Scotia in HRM, in the valley, that's the Annapolis Valley there, Truro, Antigonish, and Cape Breton. And you will notice that all those places I called have connection to a university. In Halifax will be Dal, SMU, and other universities in Halifax. In the valley would be Acadia University. Truro will be the Truro campus for Dalhousie, the Truro Agricultural Campus. Antigonish will be Senefex, and Cape Breton will be University of Cape Breton. And we would run our programs in those places. And in some of those places that are identified as yellow are places where we would go and do maybe one activity, engage students once in a year. And the reason is because there's lack of universities there. However, we've been looking into working with the NSCC campus to find mentors to work within those areas. Next slide, please. And you can see that there's a population of about 21,000 African Nova Scotians. That was leading to this one. And with the population of African Nova Scotians, you can see with these stats here that there are a lot of young African Nova Scotians that live in a house of poverty with prevalence of low income and have a high rate of unemployment rate and with less university degrees. So basically, there is so much underrepresentation of people of African heritage. Their children most especially going into university or even holding a STEM degree. And that's why our organization was created. Next slide, please. Here's another statistics again from Dalhousie. You can see that prior to 2017, there were less students in science, engineering, and medicine as a whole. But after 2017, you will see that there are more graduates in science. You can see that 37 African Nova Scotian students in science. Engineering as well, it had increased, and in medicine increased as well. And this will be as a result of programs like Imhotep's Legacy Academy, other programs like plans, promoting leadership in health for African Nova Scotians at DAO, and some other programs as well that would also encourage people of African heritage to go do STEM in university. Next slide, please. Now, these were the strategies our founders took in terms of their approach towards encouraging people of African heritage to go into STEM. We decided to inform candidates about STEM as an option, and we could also help them improve their secondary school performance by helping them with tutoring in high school, and then also provide them with financial support as well, because what's good, how can they go into university if they can't support themselves financially? Next slide, please. Our method works with what we call a tri-mentoring system, where we university professors of African heritage like Dr. Tango serve as mentors to our university students who we hire to go mentor African Nova Scotian learners that are in secondary school. Now, in the picture on the right, you can see, and that's a picture of one of our programs in the valley there. I think that was King's, I can't remember, either Kings County Academy or Northeast Kings Educational Center, because those are the two schools that we work with in the valley there. And the girl on the left is a mentor from Acadia University who's working with a few students. And the lady at the back is a student support worker who helps in terms of bringing students together and ensuring that they take part in our program. So now I think they were doing a chemistry experiment there, as you can see from the beakers and apparatus they have in front. Next slide, please. Here are some of the main programs that we have. I won't go into all of them, but you can see that we try to reach students at different stages in their education. In elementary, not as much, but our focus is usually starts when they're in junior high, from around grade 6 to grade 9 for junior high. And then when they get into high school, we try to provide students with tutoring. And then when they go to university, we also provide other programs as well that we can engage them in. And then all the things just a way to prepare students for the labor market. Next slide, please. Yeah, this one. And next one, please. Now, our after-school program, which you may have seen in the last slide, is we it's a program where we engage students in science activities, hands-on science activities, with items that they can buy from the grocery store, from the dollar store, from, they could even find some of them from home. And these are some of the activities that we have, where we teach students how to investigate hologram and help them make somewhat of a hologram with plastic and lights and phones. There's physics and music. So all these things would actually teach students various science and technological subjects. And one of my favorite days making a DNA is a DNA extraction, where students will learn how DNA works. They get to make a DNA with licorice, marshmallows, and toothpicks. So those are things you can get from home. And it's very fun for them. They get to see the different parts of the DNA and learn the names and names of different parts of the DNA. And then they also get to extract a DNA from bananas or strawberries. Next slide, please. I'll show the video, but I didn't want to take too much time. And then I think Dr. Tango will take it from here, and then I'll finish up later.
So thank you. I'll pick up from here. Thank you very much, Sidney. This is just a reflection on invention and innovation around Black people. The first one I just pick randomly between ladies or females and males. Dr. Jackson is a theoretical physicist. She developed touch-tone telephones and fiber optic stuff. And she graduated from MIT. And right now she is the 18th president of this polytechnic. So essentially, a lady like this is inspirational to our young fellow. Next slide, please. Dr. Latimer is an inventor and he's an engineer, also from in a Massachusetts area. He's a collaborator he even worked with Thomas Edison. So he's quite an accomplished fellow. Next one, please. Dr. Mary Brown, she was a nurse, and because of visiting communities and she recognized there is a security threat, she ended up inventing a home security system, very clever one. So about closed circuit television security. So yeah, this is an accomplished work. Next slide, please. It's just a cross section. And Dr. Johnson, he used to convert heat to electricity, but he started with a water gun, which is kind of fun, but he also works with Air Force, NASA and Air Force. So, and he has 40 patents, quite an accomplishment, but it's just a cross section of Black scientists and innovators. If we talk to students about these people, they get inspired and say, oh yeah, I can do it. Next slide, please. If you have access to this file, there are many inventors who talked about. Some of them are in the type of activities we normally engage our students, so we use them as an example. Next slide, please. I will just talk about the activities which Sidney mentioned earlier. Like one, we develop a kit full and is prepared by summer students. And then when our mentors go to school, they use one of those activities. I will just talk about one. There are many. Like in this case, we engage students during the activity with an African proverb, like as the wound inflames the finger so much, so inflames the minor. This is an Ethiopian, but it's connected to, because it's blood and you talk about blood plasma, about cells. So you kind of connect the scientist with the theme of the course. And at the same time, perhaps it's about the same time the teacher in science is teaching the same concept in school, either a week ahead or after, but it's really a nice connection. So we do the same for many others, making a slime, making a lantern, and all of them are tied up to a scientist. This one is this lady is from Congo. Her invention ended up being taken by Hydro-Quebec. So there are many inspirational stuff. We engage students to reflect that what you're doing, someone has done really good work beyond them. Next slide, please. And again, all of them, there are more of this flashlight, miracle sight, and mixing. All of them, there is a connection with African proverb. We even show them where the map is or where the country come from. This is kind of a way to engage kids. Next slide, please. This is when twice a year, Sidney will leads this. Twice a year, our mentors, we get them together like Friday to Saturday, and they present on different activities just to improve some of the minor details and empower their presentation skills, how to engage kids. And this is one of the sessions. This is Dr. Hewitt, physics from physics department at Dalhousie, evaluating this mentor and on one of the activity. And this lady here was our former student at Acadia. She's graduated from environmental engineering at Dal. She was one of the mentors, and she is working with Dr. Hewitt just to engage these kids because she has done that many times. So there's kind of multi-layer of cooperation and working together. I think that's it for now. Sidney will pick up from here.
Thank you very much. So just to reiterate some of the things that Dr. Tango said, our program works in what's called an Afrocentric way, where we try to encourage students with people of African heritage that have made significant impact in those STEM fields. For example, those students may not have role models or parents who are in STEM fields, so we try to show them role models using students of African heritage from university as mentors. And in the activities, like Dr. Tango just showed, you would see that we start our activity with a proverb from Africa. That way, we can show reflection. We can show students reflection of their heritage in Africa, and also show them a person of African heritage who have made a significant discovery in that STEM field. So now we'll talk about some of our recent updates at Imhotep Selassie Academy. Please, next slide. So far, we've been successful, and these are pictures. The pictures on the right you see is our annual closing ceremony this was one that was done in 2019. We're in our 17th year of operation, and we're in about 15 schools and centers across Nova Scotia. We have 4 core programs for secondary school learners and 2 core programs for university students. In total, we have about 14 programs. We employ about 35 students from university to run our programs yearly from all over Nova Scotia. Last year, we had to stop our program in March due to COVID-19, and then we had to transition from in-person sessions to an online virtual session. And we've been able to do that well because what we do now is that we still try to maintain that hands-on approach with students, where we send them or we mail them STEM kits at home. So students now can receive our STEM kits at home, and they could follow us online to do the sessions. So last year we reached about 1,584 students up until March, and then we still counted after that. So far we have about 8 Promise Scholarship recipients that are in secondary school right now, and 15 of them are recipients at DAL. So that's a TD scholarship that we provide to students to help them, continue their education in university at DAL. And it's $2,000 to $5,000 renewable scholarship that goes to the students every year throughout the 4 years of their education. On average, 60 of our students graduate and go into university yearly, and about 30 of them go to DAL, which is unique actually, because we have a huge presence at DAL. Some of our students give testimonials, and one of them I just copied and pasted there. The students said our tutors are patient and they're understanding, and they try the best that they can in making sure that she gets, I'll say from her, I get the topic and the topics that she had trouble with. Next slide, please. We moved into a brand new facility at Dalhousie at the engineering campus at Dal some time ago, and we have 4 new offices for our full-time staff. We have a learning center that's for tutoring and is equipped with things like computers, textbooks, and other learning resources. And the picture on the top right is a group of university students and high school students studying together, and doing a quiz during Black History Month, I think a few years ago. Unfortunately, we can't use it now due to social distancing. We can't be at the office. We're working from home. We also have a makerspace, the one that you see on the bottom right there, that has 3D printers, STEM activity beans, soldering station, wet lab, experiment sink, toolkits, and so many other things that we would invite students to come into that center and do activities with them. We do 3D printing activities with them, and other kinds of activities as well. Some of our limitations is that we are unable to reach so many rural areas, but we still try the best that we can to reach those areas. Next slide, please.
All right. I'm sorry, Sidney, I'm going to have to ask us to kind of hold off now and see if we can get it, because we're kind of tight. This is really exciting, but I'm so sorry. I don't want to lose people.
That's fine. What I would just say,
something from everyone. So maybe we can come back. I'm just going to ask everybody if they would be willing to give us maybe another 15 minutes more, so we can get some hear from Anna and from our presenters in theology, because we haven't started one whole discipline yet. Is that okay? And then if anything, we can come back to this. All right? Okay, so thank you so much. It's hard because this is exciting, but I'm gonna ask Anna if she could make her response, and then at the end we pick up with the rest of the slides from this very exciting presentation on STEM.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. Well, many thanks to Reverend Dr. Lewis for inviting me to participate in this very important conversation. And thank you also to Dr. Tango and to Sidney for their very energizing presentation. I'm extremely honored to be a part of this. It is incredibly heartening that such substantive initiatives are being undertaken for empowering African youth to pursue studies in the STEM disciplines from which they have historically been excluded. In my comments, I argue that these initiatives are not just socially justified as bringing together an underrepresented group into important scientific professions, but also scientifically justified because they actually improve science, like freeing it of prejudice and illusion. In support of this view, I offer an illustration in the medical sciences of what can happen when racial minorities are excluded in such disciplines. Black scholar in race and bioethics Annette Dula maintains that people of different races and ethnicities can bring unique perspectives to medicine that would be missed if race is not considered. The infamous Tuskegee syphilis study crudely exemplifies this point. This was a 40-year study between 1932 and 1972 at the Tuskegee Institute in the US to investigate the natural progression of untreated syphilis in Black men. The study was conducted on 600 Black American males without their informed consent, and under the false belief that they were being treated for bad blood and that they were receiving this treatment free. Many of them died or became seriously ill, and many infected others in their communities. The Tuskegee study is a clear instance of how racist attitudes can incite the instrumentalization of persons in the pursuit of knowledge in the medical sciences, and of the failure to respect the participants' dignity and absolute worth. After the horrors of the Tuskegee study were brought to light, efforts were made to redress them, including reports and many scholarly works that stress the need for transparency, autonomy, and informed consent in medical research. Those efforts, however, only represent the beginning of the battle against racism in medical health and research. The greatest error we can make is to think that this battle is over. As Susan Reverby, author of the Tuskegee Truths, asserts, quote, "We cannot write these truths off as merely historical. We must work continually to involve minority communities in research and healthcare," unquote. Patricia King, Black professor of law and public health, stresses that equally important to the issues of transparency and autonomy and self-determination, which are in themselves extremely complex, is the disadvantageous social and economic context of the research subjects that rendered them vulnerable to exploitation in the first place. By empowering Black youth to pursue the medical sciences, the perspectives of these individuals can inform the methodology in these fields and prevent the exploitation that occurred in the Tuskegee study. The unique standpoint of an oppressed group can offer a privileged perspective on a situation or issue that others simply lack. Such a perspective promotes the appropriate direction of fit between the world and our beliefs about the world. The notion of direction of fit is appealed to by feminist epistemologist Ray Langton and many other scholars in philosophy to distinguish between two approaches in the pursuit of knowledge. Either our beliefs conform to the way the world is, or the world conforms to our beliefs. The former results in objectivity, the latter in objectification. Quote, objectification is a process in which the social world comes to be shaped by perception, desire, and belief, unquote, as happened in the Tuskegee study, in which racist beliefs turned persons into objects. The direction of fit here is from beliefs to world. Racist beliefs construct a world that contains racial discrimination and hierarchies. But since the beliefs are false, the constructed hierarchies are unjustified. Black civil rights lawyer Roger Wilkins underscores the direction of fit problem in his assertion that the greatest power wielded against Black people is, quote, the power to define reality where Black people are concerned, and then to manage perceptions and therefore arrange politics and culture to reinforce those definitions, unquote. On the other approach to the pursuit of knowledge, the way the world is determines our beliefs. The direction of fit here is from world to beliefs, as it ought to be, in order to yield objectivity. However, to discern objectively what the world is like, we need a diversity of perspectives, including those of minorities. Undoubtedly, initiatives to empower Black youth to pursue the medical sciences, as Dr. Tango and Sidney talked about, and to pursue the medical sciences and other STEM disciplines, all of these are very conducive to that end. Such initiatives are promising examples of the ways in which academic institutions in particular can promote the right direction of fit between the world that is being studied and the researcher's beliefs about that world. Getting this right is imperative for avoiding the discrimination and oppression of marginalized groups and for rebuilding trust and fostering authentic reconciliation. The road ahead may be long, but a long road is better than a wrong road. Provided we're going in the right direction, we can be hopeful that we will arrive at our destination. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna. And now to our out-of-country guests and our guest with no ties yet to Acadia University. Anthony, we welcome you and ask you to present and look forward also to Donna's response, and thank everybody for staying on for this, for the extra time. Thank you. Over to you, Anthony.
This is looking at reparations and Black Lives Matter. Part of a chapter that I did in a book a long time ago. Book is called Working Against the Grain. And in 2007 in Britain, we commemorated the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade. So in 1807, the British government passed a law to end slavery within the British dominions. Sorry, it ended the slave trade. It did not end slavery per se. And so I did some initial research looking at a biblical and theological approach to understand, to making a case really for reparations. And my argument really about that, hopefully if the PowerPoint comes up, then I'll be able to show the thing. Here we are. Okay, so if we could have the next slide, please. Yeah. So for me, this is central to issues of reconciliation. So basically, I'm arguing that if we want reconciliation, that what we also need is reparatory justice at the same time. And so I start with the basis that reconciliation is a key theological motif that runs through the scriptures and across the Christian tradition. And And we can think of reconciliation three ways. There's reconciliation between God and humankind, reconciliation between human beings across cultural, social, political, ethnic, and the economic divide. And then also there's reconciliation actually sort of within ourselves as well. If I could have the next slide, please. So it's important that I locate myself. All theology is done by particular people. Theology doesn't fall out of the sky, to quote James Cone. Theology is human speech about God. God doesn't do theology, we do. And therefore we do it often influenced by our social location and point of departure. So I'm a descendant of enslaved Africans. Reddie is a slave name. It's also my father's name, and I love my father, that's why I keep the name. Although like many diasporan Africans, I played long and hard about the possibility of actually changing my name. The name actually comes from west of Scotland and from about 1745 when Scots were deported from Britain, having lost an attempt to regain their independence. Many were sent as indentured servants to the Caribbean, and Reddie, R-E-D-D-I-E, is particularly numerous on the west side of the island, which is where my father's from. So reconciliation for the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade have been effected against a backdrop of no justice or reparations for the horrors inflicted upon enslaved Africans. Worth noting that in 1833, when the settlement was made in order to end slavery, British slave owners received £20 million, equivalent of 20 billion now, which was 40% of the gross domestic product, 40% of the gross domestic GDP of Britain at the time. And so the legacy of slavery include the intellectual absurdity of needing the movement to assert that Black Lives Matter. And even then, this is contested. That in other places, I've often said that one of the problems with the Black Lives Matter, it's not a problem, it's just that like you shouldn't need a movement to state the obvious that life and your life matters. So, in terms of the Christian scriptures, sometimes called the New Testament, Paul's writing formed the earliest documented texts in the canon. And his writing are full of references to God's reconciling work in Christ on the cross. And one can point to such texts as Romans 5:10, 1 Corinthians 5:40-21, 2 Corinthians 5:18-20, and Colossians 1:18-23. This theme, however, needs to be read in terms of Jewish thoughts. And this is important because I think this corrects the over-spiritualization of how we've often thought of reconciliation, particularly within the context of Christian theology. Next slide, please. Therefore, it's important to go back to the Jewish antecedents of theological thinking that would have influenced St. Paul in terms of his reflections on Jesus. In order to make sense of the notion of reconciliation, one also has to understand the Jewish antecedents. In the Hebrew scriptures and in Jewish thought, atonement and salvation are collective and corporate concepts. They're not simply individual ones. And this is very different to much what constitutes post-Reformation evangelical Protestantism, where the emphasis is upon individual salvation in Christ by grace through faith. Next slide, please. Therefore, there's a collective understanding to righteousness, essentially being in right standing with God, that necessitates that one should be in right relationships with others. In fact, one could argue that it appears to be the case that one cannot be in a right relationship with God unless you are doing right by others. And this can be seen, for example, within the Leviticus code. So in Leviticus 6:1-6, it says, these verses clearly state that the notion of restorative justice for that which is wrongly taken and which is described as a sin against God. That's verse 1. And therefore, shot through the Hebrew scriptures is this sense of restorative justice. One can see this concept or formula very evident within Deuteronomy 15:12-18. And the key verse for me is in verse 12, which it says, if any of you buy Israelites as slaves, you must set them free after 6 years. And don't just tell them that they're free to leave, give them sheep and goats and a supply of grain and wine. As Peter Crutchley's work has shown within the Council for World Mission, that's the organisation that I worked for before I moved to this post in Oxford, and they've been working on the Zacchaeus tax campaign. And this has shown that in the Hebrew Bible, that traditions such as the Sabbath and Jubilee were moments of system reset and dismantling iniquities that have been accrued in the years previous before the last reset. These were moments of breaking the cycle of the ongoing basis of debt and economic enslavement. It's worth reminding ourselves, as I said, that not one penny has been given to any of the descendants of enslaved Africans for the wrong that was done to them. And yet Christian communities in the West don't want to talk about redemption that is affirmed by our Judeo-Christian roots. Next slide. A key element, therefore, for me, in terms of unlocking the scriptures and arguing for a form of reparations, is post-colonial hermeneutics. And the hermeneutical key to unlocking the scriptures in order to discern a theological pattern for using money and other resources for enacting restorative justice can be found in the lens of post-colonial theory. A post-colonial framework emerges when the reader recognizes that in the context in which all New Testament canon was composed was one that echoes to the restraining strains of colonialism. Judea, in which Jesus' ministry was located, was an occupied colony of Rome, of the Roman Empire. So kingdom of God versus colonial exploitation. Scholars such as William Herzog III, Jesus, Justice and the Reign of God, have shown the extent to which wealth in this province was always connected with economic exploitation. So when Jesus challenges the rich young ruler, Mark 10:17-27 and Matthew 19:60-22, to give away all he has in order to follow him, he says this is in the knowledge that the young man's accumulation of wealth was not amassed in a neutral context. And the reason why this encounter is so compact is because both the rich young ruler and those first hearers knew the expectations of how he should behave. Next slide, please. Commerce, civilization, and Christianity. These were the three C's that underline the rationale on which the British Empire was based. And it was coined by a London Missionary Society old boy, David Livingstone, and he said this in Oxford in 1857. So in the exporting of Christianity via the European missionary agencies in the 18th and 19th century were largely undertaken under the aegis of empire and colonialism. Christian mission, therefore, has had a difficult relationship with non-white bodies or the subalterns for centuries, as they are the other and have been exploited for economic gain. There is no ethic of equality between the missionaries and the natives. Next slide, please. And so therefore there's a continuum between then and now. In light of post-colonial hermeneutics, I believe that one can see that Jesus' teachings around wealth and its relationship to discipleship and living the Jesus way has political and economic implications. Scholars such as Musa Dube, Catherine Keller, Michael Nauser, and Marera Rivera have all shown the similarities between first century Palestine, the slave epoch of the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries, and the era of colonialism and our present globalized post-colonial context. This context is based upon imperialistic colonial expansion, capital accumulation, forced labor, and exploitation of the rich by the poor. Pharaohs on both sides of the blood-red waters. This arresting phrase is the title of a recently published book by the famed anti-apartheid activist and Black liberation scholar Alan Boussac, who reflects on the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement largely in the US and reflects also on post-apartheid South Africa. In the latter, he speaks of the corporate reality of cheap grace as outlined by the famous German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. The West has attempted transformation without sacrifice or restorative justice. And just as Bonhoeffer chided Western Christians for wanting to have discipleship without radical commitment to God's word and forgiveness and redemption without struggle and sacrifice, Boussac reminds us that there is no redemption without the cross. Pick up your cross and follow me, Matthew 16:24-26, Luke 9:23. Due to the influence of post-Reformation evangelicalism, we have largely interpreted Jesus' words in terms of pick up your cross and follow me in a purely individualistic way. But as I said, as post-colonial scholars have shown in the Jewish tradition, issues of reconciliation, issues of reconciliation, redemption, and salvation have a corporate and a collective dimension to them, as well as an individualistic one. Therefore, I believe that institutions like the Church of England in the UK can set a prophetic lead, and other Christian institutions as well, and civic bodies by entering into a conversation around making a promise to make some type of financial reparation. Cheap grace never leads to redemption and reconciliation. Without restorative justice, there is no reconciliation, and the mission of Christ is greatly diminished. And as I said, this presentation is taken from an earlier piece of work that was published in 2008. The book is called Working Against the Grain, Reimagining Black Theology for the 21st Century. And that's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And we're going to go right into Donna for the final presentation, her response. Thank you all so much.
And thank you, Dr. Reddie, for that rich presentation. Just one note that I should make. I forgot to tell Marjorie that I stopped being EDI co-chair in November, and Polly Leonard and Sabrina Whitman have taken over, but I was the inaugural co-chair for EDI at Acadia and served that way for a year and a half. So I come to Dr. Reddie's presentation out of a complicated history and as a insider outsider. To locate myself, for 17 years I was a Christian pastor and theologian, but 20 years ago left the tradition and left the church, and now my work is in comparative religion and anthropology of religion. And so if in one sense, as I read your PowerPoint and listened to you then again today, I'm such an insider, you had me, my old insider came awake and you had me nodding from the get-go. So it's always difficult if you agree too much, right, to respond. And to locate myself even further in terms of my academic work and also my response to you, I'm the daughter of working class people, and I am indebted to my family for my ongoing life. I didn't leave them behind when I stopped occupying a working class job, and was the first person from our family to be able to have the privilege of attending university. And when I was a theologian, a seminarian, I read early on the works of liberation theology of Gustavo Gutierrez and his preferential option for the poor, and it spoke radically to my own life and to the lives of the poor around the globe, and solidified in me an ongoing commitment to justice that had in fact taken me to those studies. Secondly, I'm a feminist and who is keenly aware that for women who live in religious traditions, they face a redoubling of subjugation and oppression. And I come with a commitment, I had a commitment as a Christian theologian that anyone who reflects on God is a theologian. And so that's to say I value the lived experience of women. I did then, I still do. It's always the beginning point for my scholarship and work. So one of my questions as a response that comes out of your presentation is, what about that redoubled subjugation for women? How do you listen to womanist voices? Or that would be something we could talk about more. I'd be interested to hear, because those layered oppressions really are important, it seems to me, to take into account. My notes, I'm having Marjorie's problem. I did find myself thinking off the top of my head in my EDI hat as I was listening to you. I wrote, what if the university took seriously the idea of Sabbath and Jubilee in terms of restorative justice for various communities of color? And so I'm always thinking now, my calling, if you want to say, is now as an academic, as a teacher, as a scholar. And you made me wonder that. The other question I have is also, how do you see reparations? I understand entirely why the financial is so important, given your argument. Do they go beyond that? And I'm interested in how you see that. I'm a little shocked when you said at the end the Church of England can lead in this, because in Canada at least, and I would assume in Britain, the Church of England is whiter than white. And so, a huge majority of, and so how do we convince those who have to give that up, give that privilege up? I wanted to spend my few minutes of remaining time just to talk about options for engaging in the spirit of what you've talked about. I think that I try to pursue in my teaching. And I thought I could do that by talking about one particular course that I teach, which is a course on global women's movements, in which, because I'm also a comparative religion scholar, my focus is the globe. I grow frustrated that so much of what our students learn here in North America is about North America. And there's so much more of the world, I say. So I have a rule in that class that students must not work on women's movements in the global North, except for Asia, because we have a gap in our curriculum around Asia. And so students are always taken aback, but then we get partway into the first class, and I show them a film about the Liberian Women's Mass Action for Peace movement, which in effect ended the Liberian Civil War, right, which had gone on for many years. Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, and I'm going to I should have written her name down. Lima Gabi won Nobel Peace Prizes for their work in this. But one of the things, and the students are always terribly moved by this film, right? And it's part of why I show it. This Mass Action for Peace was formed by Christian and Muslim women in Liberia, who came together desperate for peace, right? Desperate for peace. And they were able to unite across religious lines, right, in pursuit of this thing that they needed for life, right? They needed the war to stop. They needed their children to stop dying. They needed their husbands to stop dying. They needed to be able to eat, to sleep, and to go on with their lives. And they created this very powerful movement that in the end, through various forms of protest, was able to make, in fact, the men involved in the peace talks stay in the room to come to an agreement. And you had on the one hand the Muslim-lured leaders, and on the other hand the government leaders, and they were able to force these factions to find a way forward. And one of the things that's always, one of the reasons I do that in the class is, first of all, to show wisdom from elsewhere. These women found their own way. They overcame all kinds of divides that are quite serious, right, in daily life. They had never joined together as Muslim and Christian women, and yet they were able to unite out of their crisis, right? And so I guess, and we go on from there, and of course to explore many other movements in other countries, other African movements. But part of what we try and do in the course is, by the end of the course, to have these students, many of whom, the women's studies students, fancy themselves activists committed to justice and right action, right? Good ethics. Part of the reason we teach the course this way, we go from country to country, movement to movement, is to encourage these students to learn how to listen to people who are not them, right? To create a space for people who have not had it, and how to use their agency to put themselves in a receptive position to both learn from these women and to act in ways that support but do not overtake. And as women who come from the global north. Now, sometimes our situation is complicated because we have students in our classes who are not from the global north, and then we work that out as we go. But part of what I was, your presentation left me asking then is, how do we enact in our university, since that's my realm now, this restorative justice? And I'd really be interested in hearing what those implications are, also for white theology, right? The implications of your Black theology for white theology. So I will stop there and hope we have time to talk. I forgot to start my timer, so I hope I didn't go over.
Thank you very much, Donna and Anthony, and thanks to everyone. We have explored some really important questions here. I think Claudine started off with, we would say, the cricket loving people by bowling or googly. Does it make sense to even continue engaging with sociology or other disciplines in white patriarchal institutions? Or is this just an irredeemable space for Black people? Marc helped us to think about who is left out, and how do we evaluate these great liberal scholars and the great liberal experiment? What practical actions will people take? And we saw from our scientists the contrast between the Imhotep experience and that awful Tuskegee experiment. How much money will be put on the table? I don't think we can escape the money business, whether it's reparation or how much the government, the NGOs, the church, the universities are going to spend in moving that equity gap, not equality, equity, so that people who don't have access to resources, sometimes even food, clean drinking water, books in their homes, money to go to school, how will that equity gap be addressed, and how much money are people really serious about putting it down? And then I would say how to have the conversations. I've been watching a TV series, which I will not name, that has to do with notions of heaven and hell and quoting lots of philosophers. It's interesting. It's quirky, it's funny, but it's a conversation about ethics and philosophy in the guise of a series. So how do we have these conversations, and how do we actually get people involved in thinking deeply about ethical issues and acting on these ethical issues? We unfortunately have run over time, but what I would like to say is that that this has been recorded. We probably won't be able to have a full discussion But I just wanted folks to know that it will be recorded. And then if folks are able to stay for another 5 minutes, I haven't noticed any questions or comments in the chat. We did lose some people along the way, but I would be willing, if there is a burning question or a burning comment that somebody would like to put in the chat, I would invite you to do so now and open up a space for another few moments. I'm hoping that with the recorded video that perhaps this conversation can be taken to other spaces. And I want you to remember the things I started with. The golden rule in so many religions, enshrined in the text, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And as world events present us with really serious ethical questions, do you know what is right? Will you admit that what is right and what is true? And will you act on it? You know, to remember the diasporic African wisdom that we need to hit a straight lick with a crooked stick. And also, or as we say in Jamaica, tampon crooked and cut straight, that ethical behavior and ethical thinking still matter, even in situations of injustice. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything. So thanks to John Scott and AJ Emmanuel, who are behind the scenes and have managed the technical aspects for us, to Dr. Claudine Bonner, to Mr. Sidney Idemudia, to Dr. Marc Ramsay, to Professor Anthony Reddie, to Dr. Donne Seamone, to Dr. Martin Tango, and Dr. Anna Framatino Wilks for your excellent presentations and thought-provoking interventions for us. Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from our guests, our presenters, and those who joined us, how this conversation has gone forward in your respective institutions and spaces of conversation. Thank you, and have a great evening.